Back to the Dean Obeidallah show. Very excited to have back on the show Malcolm Nance, my friends. He's returned from literally fighting a war in the Ukraine, U.S. intelligence expert, over 36 years experience, author of various best-selling books, including They Want to Kill Americans, The Malicious Terrorist and Deranged Ideology of the Trump Insurgency. Malcolm, welcome back, and I'm glad you're safe. I know you were back to talk about your book a few months ago, but it's good to see you back.
Yeah, I came back in July to do the book launch of They Want to Kill Americans. And right after that, when I went back to Ukraine, which a lot of people thought, wow, you're going back to Ukraine, that's crazy. Yeah, that's when the real fighting started. I thought there would be a war prior to that. No, I took part in the major Kharkiv offensive. I was with the Special Operations Unit that led the assault and, made the Russians regret. So.
Can you tell us, did you go on the battlefield? Are you allowed to say? I don't want to, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Just say, don't say it. Don't, whatever. But you went on the battlefield?
Yeah, well, I've been on the battlefield full time since June. Full time.
I thought you were doing more like strategy and planning. I didn't know you were
not at all
executing.
That was my first 8 weeks in Ukraine. I was helping the Ministry of the Directorate of Military Intelligence carry out operations and activities. And then I went through their commando course in April. And then I deployed to 1st Battalion Legion, which was a frontline combat unit in Kharkiv. And then I took that little break, went back to the States for 12 days for the book tour, and then came back. And it's been nonstop battlefront ever since. And then I was forward and behind enemy lines from September onward.
Did the Russians get a sense of who you are? I know they talk about you on TV.
Oh, yeah.
Like on the battlefield, did you hear any? Was there any
as you saw, I had put a video that I had shot on the first day of the Kharkiv counteroffensive, where it's an amazing piece of video because an artillery piece comes up behind our positions. And, right-wingers are like, you're way in the rear with the artillery. Well, in fact, we were the front edge of the attack, and the attack went so quickly, so well, that within 6 hours, artillery had moved right up to our positions. We were holding for the next launch. And we're like, where's artillery doing here? It showed us how fast the Russians collapsed, that our artillery could move forward and had to sustain the offensive. So, but I did a video there where, I'm famous for saying, what now, bitches? The shice is coming down. And that was played almost nonstop on Russian state TV when they saw the video 3 weeks later. And they were saying, these are NATO forces. This is a NATO Black English speaking officer. And everybody knows I'm part of the International Legion, but for the Russians, they needed to push in Moscow that it was NATO leading the attack, and that, me doing this video was emblematic of that.
In Russia, is there media narrative from what you've seen, the idea that this is the U.S. versus Russia, or this is NATO versus Russia? It's not the Ukrainian people versus Russia?
Sure. Anyone who watches Julia Davis News, which is great Twitter feed.
Okay.
Because she's a Russian-speaking analyst. She's native Russian. And she watches Russian state TV and then puts subtitles on it. And if you watch her narrative every day, they're crazy. I mean, they pushed very hard that it was NATO attacking Russia. And that's why Russian forces collapsed so quickly, because they didn't want to have a strategic power competition. And the one guy made the absolutely famous nut statement saying that, well, this African-American NATO officer is emblematic of who's attacking us. And it's okay if they're African-American for Russian forces to retreat. And of course, I started putting out, it's actually sitting on the leather butt pad of my sniper rifle. I have an M14 sniper rifle, and it says, it's okay to retreat. I'm African-American.
That's good.
But they use this narrative for the last 2 months of my face as the face of NATO.
And this is simply no different than Trump claiming he really won the election. There was fraud. It's the cover up for their failure, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's an incredible cover up for the dynamics of how poorly they carried out their war, and they're absolutely terrible. Look, there are some things the Russians are good at. They are good at artillery. Our offensive went so fast is because when we broke through their lines like this, I put it akin to hitting a pane of glass with a sledgehammer, right? You're putting all that force behind it because we thought it was 4 inches of plexan glass and that it was going to bounce off there. We'd have to drill through it, right? No, it was really thin sheet glass, and we had a massive armored thrust, just tanks everywhere. It really looked like D-Day.
What was it like for you personally on the night before that, knowing that you were about to go on this major offensive into the Russian line and not knowing what's on the other side? I mean, you have some idea, but you don't know everything.
Yeah, well, we didn't know a lot, actually. I mean, the battalion task groups that were there were there nominally. That doesn't mean that they're going to have the capability of truly attacking and defending well. But we had to assume that. We had to assume there were going to be massive Russian artillery barrages. And there wasn't. I mean, as soon as we punched, I mean, our group attacked at 0400. The special operations, we had the special operations task force attacked all the visual observation posts where the Russians were. So we blinded them almost immediately. And then, behind us came hundreds of tanks and armored personnel carriers. It was literally like Battle of the Bulge, where tanks were just column after column. The night before, and someday I'll show this maybe on my Substack or my future podcast, I have video of all of that.
You do? That's remarkable. Oh, you've got to.
One of the things that, you get from the crazy right-wingers, which is amplified by the Russians, is you're in a hotel in Poland. Well, believe me, I was not in a hotel in Poland, bros. And the cracking of your army is proof of that. But I show you some of the preparations were just tanks and tanks, and we're throwing up gang signs to the armored personnel carriers and everything. And just how massive this offensive was.
What were you surprised by the ineffectiveness of some of you said their artillery was very good, but the soldiers and the retreat very quickly. Is it simply self-preservation? And it's not worth it to give my life for this battle in another country, which it's not, they didn't attack us, and I'm just stuck here because Putin wants us to be here.
Well, I think it's self-preservation because prior to that, they'd only seen Ukrainians, like 1, 2, 3 tanks coming up in fire support. This was not. This was a Hans Guderian Panzer Blitz. Okay. Wow. They didn't see 1 or 2 tanks. They saw 50. And then they saw 100 mechanized vehicles. And there was like, if we want to live, we have to displace. And their artillery couldn't do anything because their forward units were bypassing the artillery batteries to get out of there. So the best they could do is limber up their guns, abandon all their ammunition, and just go back east towards the Russian border, towards actually where we were, the Kupiansk, the Oskil River, and get across the river so that you were in the northern part of Luhansk province, where you had a higher concentration of Russians. The Russian border was only 40, 50 kilometers away, so you could depend on fire support from there. But, now it's turned into a more defensive war. We're taking higher casualties. But, they also know HIMARS, right? The High Mobility Multiple Rocket Launch System. That thing is a surgeon's scalpel slitting throats. So if you're an artilleryman, you're going to get off a couple of shots of artillery, and then that thing's going to fire back, and it's going to kill all of you. So they're very afraid.
That's it. And I'm talking about Malcolm Nance, as if you didn't know. So how much is the U.S.'s support in terms of financial aid, weaponry, and NATO allies significant in terms of Ukrainians' resistance and successes?
Well, it's 100%. I mean, look, here, the real fighting capacity of this war is deep in the heart of every Ukrainian soldier. I'm telling you, these guys want to fight. They don't play games with this, all right? They are happy warriors. Yes, they're sad when they lose their compatriots, but they're fighting for their wives, their children, their homes, their parents. Many of these soldiers, their parents are stuck behind Russian lines, and they are more than willing to cut throats to get to it. So when they go on the offense, the Russians understand, we use a bunch of gang terminology. There's a gunfight and then there's a throwdown, right? And when you're having like, oh, what's going on? Oh, it's a firefight, it's a gunfight, right? But when they're throwing down, that means they're putting everything: tanks, artillery, rockets, combined arms operations against the Russians, and it's no holds barred. The Russians will not survive that encounter. I actually have a video where I'm training a group of special operations soldiers, and I go, your job is one thing, all right, is to make contact with the enemy, ensure they do not survive the encounter. And that's what we call throwing down, where we normally never go full automatic, right, unless you're ambushed. And then if you're ambushed, you throw down, right? You're giving them everything: hand grenades, those rockets.
So we're seeing now, yesterday it was reported Russian targets within Russia, Ukrainians targeted them through the drones, 2 military bases about 300 miles inside of Russia. And this morning, an oil storage facility at the Kursk airport in Russia had been hit by a drone again. That one, that may or may not be confirmed. The last one, that was Ukrainian, but we're pretty sure it is. So when you were there, though, I mean, I can't imagine this is the first time they're thinking of this. They've wanted to do this. What can you share in terms of the minds of the Ukrainian military about, hey, we have the capability to hit inside of Russia. Do we do it? Do we not?
Well, I think that's a decision President Zelensky himself made with Minister Reznikov, and trying to determine where do we throw our punches. We have limited resources. They have these Tu-141 drones. They're a very ancient drone. They're actually a target drone. And when they crash with all the force of an old MiG-19 jet, right? Whatever fuel it has in it. And so they're expendable. So it doesn't cost anything. But they don't have the resources the United States can give them. But with this campaign against the major cities, it's important to go out and do this Doolittle raid-like operations against Russia, just to let them know you're not invulnerable, right? Next time, it won't be a raid with a single drone. Another thing you have to understand, the Ukrainians think deeply anyway. They're very innovative thinkers when it comes, and when they're married up with U.S. intelligence, the Ukrainians have the ability. Their pilots have flown out of these bases when they were working with Russia back in the good old days. Many of their generals were former Soviets. They've gone to school here. They know where the Tu-95 bombers are. They know where the backfire bombers are. They know what the bases look like. They can get commercial satellite imagery. But that's when they come over to the United States and they go, hey, if the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency isn't doing anything, could we have a readout on what's at these bases right now? And they go, and it's like, bloop, bloop, bloop. Okay, all this imagery suddenly shows up, as I like to say, falls off a truck into their command military headquarters. And we know they're going to do a strategic operation. Now, there's no prohibition against doing a strategic operation. We just don't want it done with our weapon systems like the ATACMS missile, which we haven't sent to them.
Right.
But another component of why this is very good for warfighting is because it means that Russia, once those missiles hit these air bases, now have to take all of their air defense missile systems that they've been essentially salvaging and taking their S-300, surface-to-air missiles, and they've been sending them to Ukraine and launching them like battlefield rockets, right? They just launch them in the air on a ballistic trajectory, knowing they will come down at X point in a city. And they've been relatively effective with that. Russia is believed to have 8,000 of these S-300 surface-to-air missiles. Yeah, but now between the Ukrainian border and all your strategic bases in the city of Moscow, you're going to have to preserve all those missiles.
That's very interesting.
Start lobbing those missiles at Ukraine. So what they've done is they've taken a weapon system off the battlefield by showing Russia its own air defense vulnerability.
And you mentioned the Doolittle raids were during World War II, where Captain Doolittle, they attacked off an aircraft carrier, right? They flew their planes and bombed Japan, even though it wasn't the Hiroshima stuff. It was conventional weapons just to show them we can hit you in your homeland. And I didn't think about the psychology of that now here as well. It does. If you make Russians afraid, you wonder if they're going, or fear, did they make them more of a will to fight, or more of like, let's get out of this? What are we doing here? Like, what do you think?
I think I think it does really affect the Russians' will to fight. There have been some polls showing that there's now a plurality of people who believe that they should negotiate some sort of deal with Ukraine. I think it's only like 28 or 30% that say, war until victory. But the Ukrainians have the upper hand here. And to be quite honest, this is a situation where Ukraine can make demands. I'm a big advocate of negotiating with Russia. Unlike Elon Musk, my negotiations would simply be, we are willing to talk to you about your unconditional surrender of your forces in our country and withdrawal from all lands, including Crimea. Then we will accept your surrender. That's the only negotiations that needs to be.
I understand, and there should be reparations, but that might be hard to get from Russia. But they should pay reparations as well in this. So I'm trying Malcolm Nance. Malcolm, so we're seeing a lot. I know you were here for this, but the Russians are attacking the cities. They're knocking out power, electricity. Coldest night of the year so far in Ukraine. I think there was an article today on that. And people were without power. This is crimes against humanity. This is collective punishment of a civilian targets. Is this just a sense of desperation by Russia? This is showing that?
Oh, yeah. And in fact, this idea was manifested on Putin's television shows by his favorite host. His version of Laura Ingraham is a woman named Olga Skabeva. And his Tucker Carlson is a guy named Vladimir Solovyov. And they discussed this throughout all of October because we had a pretty mild October. I was there. And, people were having ice cream in Lviv and Kiev. And there were pictures of these, and they were putting it on these Russian state TV shows that they're living this easy life and Russia's taking it hard and we're losing, blah, blah, blah. So within 2 to 3 weeks, Putin had manifested these news reports into a strategic bombing campaign where the stated goal was to make the Ukrainians freeze this winter. The very things they said on this television show, to make them freeze throughout the winter, to make them have no internet, to make them have no power, and to make them surrender. Now, can I recall, for those of you who remember this thing called World War II, we bombed Berlin day and night for 3 or 4 years. Years in strategic bombing campaigns that got up to the 1,000 bomber raids, where literally 1,000 US bombers were flying with 16 to 24 bombs, and we're hitting Berlin every night with that number of bombs, right? 25, 30,000 bombs, and the Germans didn't surrender. So what makes them think that knocking out a power transformer and making Lviv or Chernobyl or Ivano-Frankivsk or any of these small cities, Odessa, big cities, not have power for 8 or 10 hours is going to do anything? Look, they don't care about the heat because they're Ukrainians. Okay?
Right.
They know how to live in cold weather. It's the internet that they really, really like because they like, throwing it in the Russians' faces, right? We've got our internet. And the Ukrainian army uses Starlink, now paid for by the US government, right? Not by any largesse of Elon Musk. And they have, generators. I spent a good piece of October buying generators for all my special forces platoons. So we have 2 generators, one in our headquarters, one in our vehicles at all times, and one in our safe houses. So we have power. We can keep Starlink running.
So, you mentioned the U.S. support. I had Kevin McCarthy, who's going to be the likely speaker. Republicans get control of the House. They're getting it. It's just a question of who they pick for speaker. It's likely to him. He said, I think that people are sitting in a recession. They're not going to write a blank check to Ukraine. They just won't do it. And you've had some other Republicans talk about, you've had the extreme voices say, cut the funding. But the more mainstream view from the Republicans is we have to rein in the funding. How much does that make Putin happy to hear something like that?
Well, I mean, it makes him extremely happy. We have this pro-Moscow caucus going on, and we need to make sure that they're brought to heel as well. And this is where the naming and the shaming needs to happen. And we big advocate of calling them, pro-Moscow, right? Putin's puppets. Marjorie Taylor Greene is the biggest one of them all. I mean, the woman's so stupid. She doesn't understand that when we give money in defense loans, we require audits. And she's screaming, audit audit the loans. And we're like, they're automatically auditing. All right, since you don't know anything about government. But this is their way of helping Moscow, and they're traitors, as far as I'm concerned. The United States is fighting for the life of democracy. That's why I'm back. I'm back because I think I've pretty much got the eastern wall of democracy shored up. I have certainly helped participate in liberating many towns and villages in Ukraine. And by the way, when you're going through them, you don't think that you're liberating them, right? It's just you're patrolling, you're trying not to get shot, and the locals come out and they bring you, potato soup.
Really?
And that's liberation.
Oh, that's nice. Rose petals they throw at you. So look, you mentioned how Ukraine, what your dream is that they say to Russia, unconditional surrender and leave. How do you think, I mean, in general, war ends with some kind of negotiation. What it's going to be, we don't know. President Biden last week talked about he was open to speaking to Putin, but then it was sort of a frosty response from Putin. How do you really think, as a practical matter, this ends? The fighting has been going on since February. We're going to come to the 1 year anniversary in 2 months.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to end with the utter defeat of Russian ground forces in Ukraine. When I spoke at the Davos Economic Summit by remote out of Ukraine, representing the International Legion. And I had made what at the time seemed a fantastically wild prediction that by September, Russia's ability to conduct any offensive operations would effectively be over. The Russian army would be ready to crack by September. And lo and behold, it's like somebody heard me and said, and you're going to be one of the first teams to go into Russian territory to help do that. And that turned out to be 100% true. It cracked. Now I'm going to make another prediction.
Okay.
You are not stopping offensive operations here throughout the fall. They're going to be pressuring Russian lines and doing reconnaissance in force. I know my people are doing reconnaissance in force right now. That means we push till we see either they crack or we hit a hard space. Then we bombard it and keep pushing. But this will lead into a spring offensive by the Ukrainians that could completely rout the Russian army. When I say rout, I mean break it permanently. Anytime they move a tank in, we're going to freaking hit it with something. Anytime there's a logistics base, we're going to blow it up with HIMARS. The worst thing they could ever do, I mean, what we're going to do is what we did in Kherson. We're going to starve them. And we're going to make sure that they have no fuel. We're going to make sure that they, get into untenable terrain places where they're trapped. And we're going to keep moving around them and liberating territory. But let me tell you, come spring, we have the fuel. We have the equipment, we have the manpower, and we definitely have the heart. Everyone is going to be spending the entire winter sharpening their little Cossack swords that they like to carry. And they're going to be like growing their mustaches out into big curly cues so that they can twirl their swords and charge come this spring.
And on the other side, with Putin, I mean, is there a point where he just declares victory, says, let's go home? Or is there a point where it affects his ability to rule, where he actually is in any kind of dire situation, or is that unlikely?
Well, I would certainly hope that somebody would terminate his command with at least, 125 grains of, 45 caliber ammunition. So, but there's nothing you can do about that. That's an internal Russia issue.
Right.
My problem that I have is what happens when we do break their lines? What happens when we really do break through and another army, collapses? And the next place that's scheduled to happen, you can see it happening now, is in Luhansk province. Even though they're throwing offensives at Bakhmut and Donetsk, they're losing thousands of men for no reason. It's a village we're going to own again. And we will get Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, but the offensives are not in their face. The offensives are going through their rear now, to the point where the Kharkiv offensive operations are starting to completely merge into the Donetsk-Luhansk operation zone. So now we have multiple armies pressuring them. They have all these mobilized men who are just getting slaughtered in the field. And it's a question of how long they can take the ass kicking that we're going to keep delivering. I don't think they'll take long. And I think that by spring, late spring, maybe even early summer, the entire Russian army will crack. Well, let me rephrase that. The remainder of the Russian army that survives will crack. Big difference.
So if people haven't been following the details of this, it seems to me, and tell me if this is too simplistic, Russia is losing this war.
Russia is really losing this war.
I just want Malcolm to confirm it. That's what it seems like. I'm reading. I'm like, I think they're losing.
I hear people saying that. It doesn't sound like it's going so good over there. I'm like, who are you watching?
Right.
We are winning by every measure there is. By January 1st, we will reach 100,000 dead Russians. Trust me, I have a lot of dead Russians. I've participated in making sure that they, did not survive the encounter. But they are really losing men. I mean, we find dead everywhere. They abandon their dead. So we know how many men are dying. Whenever one of those tanks is moving down a road and it gets hit with a Javelin missile and it blows up, that is 3 dead men. There are no way to undead them. We can count. And, it's not real body counts, but the Russians never take their dead. They leave them behind. It's horrible.
Is that odd? Is that odd for the military?
Oh, it's disgusting. It's disgraceful. They are 2 things that they really are. They're real pigs. The thing about them, Mike, about stealing the washing machines, not a joke. Every Russian position I have ever been in had a pile of washing machines packed up and ready to go back to Russia. Not joking. It's like Russia, someone said this on Twitter. What have they been washing with? Have they been washing with, in rivers with rocks? No, it's Soviet. A lot of the infrastructure is still Soviet. So there are large, industrial laundries for these communities. And having a washing machine is, it's like indoor plumbing. It's a status symbol. So the first, what was it? Hard point that we hit by the Russians. I can't say where it is. I don't want to say where it is, but way behind Ukrainian lines now, 200 kilometers behind Ukrainian lines now. But it was a science center, and there were 6 washing machines stacked up in what was clearly the commander's area, right? At radios and a lounge, couches, and his washing machines to be shipped back home. And I thought it was a joke. No, that's what they're there. They're to steal and loot, and quite apparently to die.
Ukraine should fire washing machines at Russia just for fun and filling up with stuff. Just send them over. It's like I just saw 3 Kings again. They were stealing in the movie. They wanted to steal gold. You got Russians, and that was American. It was George Clooney. It was fiction. But in this case, they're stealing washing machines. So last 2 things. You mentioned Elon Musk. And go ahead.
Someday I will talk to you. We'll have top secret story time, and I will talk to you about the character that Ice Cube plays in there.
Really? That's interesting. Oh, very good.
The chief. And as I understand it, in the original screenplay, it was a black Navy chief who spoke Arabic.
Oh my God, could that be Malcolm Nance?
I'm the only black Navy chief speaking Arabic in northern Kuwait, southern Iraq at the time. But we'll talk about that someday, how the people who wrote 3 Kings dropped this into me.
I look forward to chatting with you. So last 2 things. One, you mentioned Elon Musk. And this goes back to almost your book about they kill Americans, the malicious terrorists and deranged ideology. Well, Elon Musk is letting the deranged ideology back on. He literally let on the neo-Nazi who incited people to kill me, that I sued in federal court and I got a judgment. And he incited violence against others, Andrew Anglin. When you see this and this huge spike in hate crimes, what do you think is going on with Elon Musk? Are we missing something that's not about business? There's something bigger? That's what I'm getting.
He's ideologically believes in white supremacy. He's a South African. He grew up in apartheid in South Africa. I mean, his father made all his millions off of sub-Saharan African emerald and diamond mines. Elon Musk himself was self-made with a pocket full of diamonds and emeralds he smuggled into New York City in his pockets. That's his, his hero's journey. And he goes and he buys other people's companies and puts his name on it and says he's a genius. The man is clearly deranged. I mean, just read some of the things he said. And then his tweet the other day saying he is now going to use the entire weight of Twitter to support Donald Trump to win the 2024 election, or Trump or the Republicans.
Republicans, yeah. He likes DeSantis a lot. He loves DeSantis.
DeSantis' camp because He thinks it's only fair that because Twitter apparently stole the 2020 election from Donald Trump. Who in their right mind thinks like this? This guy is a stupid Bond villain. The genius of Elon Musk is over. Okay, there is no genius here. Okay, I spent my entire career in the US intelligence community looking for troublemakers. And you know where I found most of the potentates and warlords were, right? Was about money. It was never about any ideology, whatever you wanted to do. It was about garnering money for themselves. So all we have is a Bond villain here who now thinks he bought Twitter to stop the criticism of the Saudis, of Russia, and to essentially buy the biggest microphone in the world to put in a fascist ideology into the White House. So I'm done. Now look, if Twitter could collapse tomorrow, he could hear this and say Malcolm Nance is banned from Twitter. But it would just prove my point, okay? He is out to not just knock down Twitter. He is out to harness Twitter and turn it into Truth Social for the Republicans. And he has weaponized what we would all call freedom of speech by removing consequences of freedom of speech, right? So you can go on Twitter now and call for the burning down of the movie theater, shouting fire in a movie theater, unless you're Kanye West, right? And he let Kanye West get away with a lot of stuff. But I think that we are in a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous point in democracy. I said this when the election was over. We saved democracy-ish. Now we have to counterattack. And that's what I'm back to do. I'm back to, help shore up the Western wall of democracy. There's probably another book in this where I'm going to scream at the top of my head and no one's going to listen.
No, we're going to listen. To me, I was on Joy's show Friday, and I said point blank, I don't think Elon Musk is a friend of the United States of America. And I say that sincerely, and not because he's an immigrant. I think his agenda is about money. We were his second choice. He went to Canada first from South Africa. Didn't work out whatever he wanted, then came here. And he can move on to another country. We are his third citizenship. I don't think he really cares about this country. I think he cares about attention, trolling, destabilizing. Look what he's doing, Malcolm. He is amplifying the divisions of our society, just like Russia did in 2016 to help Trump and hurt Hillary. It's no different to me.
No, but he's decided his platform now is going to be the arbiter of who is elected. I wrote about this in my book, The Plot to Destroy Democracy, which was about Putin and his spies manipulating what I term the globogarchy. That is the global oligarchy. There is a certain level where nation states, borders, passports no longer apply. Certain level of money. And Elon Musk is at that level of money, But I got to tell you something. The street could do something about the Elon Musk problem tomorrow. Everyone out there could commit to ensuring that they sell, if they have Tesla in their stocks, to getting rid of it. If they own a Tesla, to take it out and turn it in for one of the better cars. It's just a goddamn iPad, with wheels. And there are better electric vehicles out there. I'm dying to get one. But you know what? I will never, ever, ever, for the defense of global democracy, ever put another penny into that system. So we have to understand we have the power. And the only way to fight the power is to understand that you've got to get out of your comfort zone. And, my editor, when she read my book proposal, was like, wow, this is like a modern Thomas Paine's Common Sense. And I go, he called for revolution. I'm not calling for revolution. I'm calling for the defense of what we've had for centuries. And the global oligarchy, they would rather eliminate all of that and move us all to authoritarian, totalitarian dictatorships. And then their money, the population, will just be the ATM for them.
My friend, I appreciate it. It's great chat. I'm so glad you're back. And I saw some pictures. Maybe you were in New York. If you come back to New York, please let me know. It'd be great to grab a cup of coffee with you and just chat, and you can tell me about the top secret things from Three Kings and about where you hid in the gold, that kind of stuff. So, all right, Malcolm, thanks so much, brother. It's great chatting with you. And I hope you come on now that you're back, you know, a little, when you have time, a little more often. I always enjoy talking to you, and I learn a lot, and listeners learn a lot from you. So thank you.
All right, Dean. We'll see you too.
Take care. Have a good day.